A year after I graduated, I was at a local church and I had some really good friends of mine who really, really wanted me to meet their brother, Paul. So they took me home for a weekend and I got to meet their brother, Paul. I was instantly madly in love, had no idea that he was there that weekend to break up with somebody else. He called me about 2 months later, and then it took a grand total of 3 months before we were married. We had been blissfully married for the first year, and it was right after our first anniversary that we got the news that Paul had cancer. We had people literally around the world praying for him, and about 8 months later, we got the news that the cancer was gone. Everything was great. God answered prayer. We were so happy. It only took a year and a half, and the cancer came back. And the second diagnosis was much more intense. It was much more advanced. And I said, is it okay to ask God why? Am I not trusting him by asking why? I mean, we hadn't done anything wrong. It felt like we were being punished for something to keep going through this trial, basically our whole married life. And I didn't understand that. Had all the same people praying, probably more, lots more people praying for him. And I was so convinced that God was going to heal him. There was never even a moment that I doubted that a complete healing was coming because God had already done it once. So I knew God was going to heal him again. So on March 30th of 2006, God answered my prayer in a way that I never saw coming. And God healed Paul, but it wasn't the way that I thought it was going to happen. He took him to heaven, and I know as a believer that it's the ultimate healing, and I know he's much better off. It just wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
Living in a sheltered home and being burnt out in ministry caused me to feel what I thought was freedom when I left home when I was 23. And so when I moved back into an environment with some roommates that were not in church, not doing things that they should be doing. And so I guess spread my wings for about a year and a half. Did not go to church, did not have a desire to go to church, going out with friends on the working to go out on the weekends and have a party. So Peter was the same situation, and we were both out of church and definitely away from the Lord. My parents started learning sign language when we were 4, 5, 6 years old, and we grew up speaking a second language naturally. So I don't remember learning sign language. It has just been something natural that we have been doing our whole life. Peter had been requested to interpret a funeral service. And so he did, and it was from that celebration of life service impacted him enough to where he started going back to church. And I guess the church made several DVDs, and he picked one of those DVDs up, and he told me, he said, man, you should really take time to watch this. It has really impacted me, and I think you would enjoy this. And I had no desire to watch.
His brother, who had been hired to interpret, gave him a DVD copy of the funeral, which to me still blows my mind. Why would you give somebody a copy of a funeral and ask them to watch it? That's so strange. But Peter felt compelled to give him that DVD and ask him to watch it. So apparently it sat on the shelf for several months.
Don't know why I gave any second thought to it, but I, for some reason, kept coming back to that DVD. And so it was about a couple months later, plugged in that DVD and saw someone who loved the Lord and had impacted people through his life at a young age. And it was through that the Lord kind of started tugging on my heart to say, what are you doing with your life? If you were to have passed and had a celebration of life service, what would be said of you?
That celebration of life service is what ended up getting Paul Dublin to come back to church. But about 8 months into the grieving process, I eased back into the singles group with my close girlfriends, very protective of me. And I was talking to several of them one day about how hard it was for me to design Paul's headstone. So one of the girls said, well, there's a guy that's been coming to church the last couple of months that used to work in the funeral industry, and he used to design headstones. And that is when I first met Paul Dublin.
Our youth pastor out in San Diego had offered me a position when I turned 18 to be an admin assistant and in his business, which was a funeral product supply company. I had heard that there was somebody that potentially needed help with a headstone. I drew up a couple sketches of what it could look like and what it could be.
I was really struggling to make decisions in the beginning, and he showed me lots of options, helped me literally design it, including lots of stuff that the funeral homes here had told me they couldn't include. Got it delivered and got it installed for me right before the first anniversary. He was very patient and very understanding, and that's what I needed. So it was about 2.5 years total after Paul passed that Paul Dublin and I got married. In the day-to-day grieving process, it is really hard to see God's hand, and you spend lots of long nights questioning, what are you doing? Is this ever going to get better? And in hindsight, I can see now that God never left. He was there the whole time.
God can use anyone's life at any point in their life to bring him glory. And I know Marlissa did not understand why things were happening, did not understand why God took Paul home. But I'm a why. My brother is a why. And countless others that have been affected just by the life of Paul Jewell.